It's noon Eastern time exactly. For those of you who are jumping on, first off, thank you guys for being here. This is our final, Gillie's one of two final sessions that we have today. We have a final session with Rachel Bernstein this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So, wow, thank you guys. And it's been amazing too, because you know, some people tune in for one of these meetings and that's all they tune in for, and that's great. And then we have people who are on for every single webinar, people who watch all of them. And so it's just been fantastic, the response we've had. So thank you guys so, so much. I also wanted to thank, of course, Gillie. This is her third time being on with us. And every time Gillie is on, the response has just been incredible. The questions and answers have just been amazing. And so I would love to just set aside this time for Q&A. You know, what are the questions you guys have as we wrap up this series? There's a lot going on right now, and we want to be really mindful of that and help you in your needs as best we can. I also wanted to emphasize, you know, that this isn't necessarily a therapy session, but just any questions you have that you think Gillie might be able to answer, please submit them via the Q&A function and not the chat. We want to make sure that this meeting is secure for you guys. So submit questions at any time. Gillie, is there anything you'd like to say while people are typing their questions and thinking about things they want to ask?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, thank you to ICSA, as I call it, ICSA, you know, for having me on. It's a privilege, and it's just one way of giving some support, you know, at this time, for free, basically. But I want to encourage people to look at becoming a member of ICSA. I've been a member since '98, I think, or certainly into the early 2000s, and have really benefited from the networking and the great magazines and that sort of thing. So just consider that. And then the next thing I want to say is I'm not a guru, haha. And I just want to say I'm going to answer your questions from my heart, what I know. I'm a former cult member. I have studied this subject at master's level, PhD level. I've worked with loads of former cult members, both born and raised and first generation, those who joined. So all I can do is bring my experience. If I don't know the answer, I'll just say. And I actually, what I want you to do is to really chew over everything that's said and think about it. Do I agree? You know, I know what I know, and you know what you know. And I can only, it's not a dialogue here, so I'll answer it, but you need to think about it, okay? And I just think it's really important for former members to keep remembering that when we're free, we're allowed to chew things over and think about it for ourselves.
Sure. Well, and I want people, oh, thank you. And I want people to know too, I've so appreciated those of you who've disagreed. Like, you know, we've had some sessions where people have been like, like I don't agree with that, and they've commented, and I think that's excellent. You know, I want this to be a safe space for dialogue for people. ICSA has a quite extensive amount of articles written on the benefits of dialogue, you know, coming from different perspectives and diverse viewpoints. And I want to encourage disagreement. And, you know, I've tried to read those comments with people who do disagree, because I want them to feel affirmed. You know, I want you guys to feel affirmed in where you're coming from and all that. So, you know, feel free. And in regards to the questions too, it could be related to COVID and recovery, or maybe specific struggles you're dealing with right now. It could have to do with being raised in a cultic environment, questions you may have, just whatever you would like to ask. And it looks like we have one question that's already come through. Someone said, sometimes when I look at how many years I spent in my cultic group, I feel bad because it seems like I wasted years of my life. When I look at it carefully, I realize that my time was not wasted, but I tend to feel bad about it nonetheless. How does one move beyond that feeling?
Okay. Sorry, a window came up asking.
It's okay. Oh, I'm sorry about that. That's the poll. We are asking a poll if everybody could take the time to quickly answer that poll. It gives us some really valuable data moving forward with webinars.
I just got rid of it.
No, you can't answer it anyways because you're a panelist, so it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about lost years, and you know, it's a really tough one, I know. I probably spent around 30 years of my life muddling about in all these kind of culty things, and yeah, I mean, you say you feel bad, and I can't dialogue with you, and I kind of want to say, what does bad mean? You know, what does it mean to you? I think it's something, I think it's amazing that you've come to terms with it. You said that, I think that was something like that, but you still feel bad about it. Yeah, it is regrettable, but we still have a life ahead of us, and that's kind of how I see it. And I'm 67 now, and you know, kind of in the danger zone with COVID, and I'm just trying to hold on to that, to the idea of, you know, whatever time we have is time we have, and we can use it in the way we want to and freely. There's an idea in trauma theory, I don't know if you've heard of it, called post-traumatic growth. There's a lot of stuff online, and the bottom line of it is that, and I would never tell anyone this, but that we can grow because, and maybe in spite of, our traumatic experiences, or we can make something of it. And I guess I've done that with training as a therapist, and doing this, you know, has brought me to today and doing this. So although, as I say, I would never say to anyone, maybe you learned something from it, because it's not for me to say, but for me, I guess as I learned about this field, and I made something of that. I didn't have to, I could have gone in a different direction. So I don't know if that's
great. They commented post-traumatic growth. I will have to look that up. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Definitely look it up, and but look at it carefully, because I looked at it for when I did my doctoral research, and I made a comment in my thesis actually, is that it has to be approached very carefully and sensitively with former cult members, because some of the language sounds a little bit triggering, I think, in some of the literature. It's not, they don't know anything about cults. Clearly they know about trauma, the writers. So, you know, just approach it being aware that some of the language might be triggering, but it's a positive idea.
Yeah, thank you. I also, you know, want to encourage people, even if you don't so much have a question, but if you have a comment on what's helped you during this time, what's helped you with cult recovery, I'd love to hear what has helped you guys. And I want this to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to jump in at any point in the Q&A box, everybody. So thank you. And that was an excellent question to start off with. I just learned something. I didn't know what post-traumatic growth was, so thank you.
Well, I could talk for a whole hour again on that, so there you go.
Great. And please respond to the poll. Pat Ryan sent a message there. So someone said, I had a question about post-cult identity and relating to other people. I was raised in a group which I left in my early 20s. This was about 20 years ago. After I left, I tried to leave my cult experience behind and create a new life for myself through university, etc. I didn't tell anyone in my new life that I had been in a cult. Now I have a career and a seemingly normal life, but I feel really isolated and have trouble forming connections with other people. I think this might be because of my post-cult identity is also not authentic, because I've tried to ignore the fact that I was in a cult. How can you accept the fact that you were in a cult and try to talk to people in your present post-cult life about the part of your life to try to feel more connected to other people in the present? That's an excellent question. Thank you.
Right. I mean, I expect there's lots of people would like to comment on that. I guess, I mean, there's a lot in that. My first thought is, why not tell your friends? I mean, I understand many reasons why we don't tell people, and it took a long time for me to admit to people I'd been in a cult, and it could feel quite shameful and humiliating to tell them. But I have worked with some people who, and this has happened a few times, who were born and raised, who have, like you, started a whole new life, moved from the area where the cult was, so no one could locate them as being from that particular cult, but still hadn't told their friends, and so felt they were being a little fake, or kind of afraid that people would ask certain questions and they'd have to go, So in the therapy, we actually really talked about it and sort of, well, why? You know, genuinely looking at why don't I? Why didn't this person tell their friends? And it was partly because of shame. They felt, as I did, very humiliated at being brought up, thought they'd be seen as weird, you know. And but they were also very connected with this group of friends, and actually in many ways very open with them. And eventually, I don't know what happened, we kind of talked about it, and then one day they made a decision they were going to tell just the closest friends. And it just changed everything for them, because, you know, they actually found that the friends were really interested, they were sympathetic, because there was a lot of abuse that actually occurred. And actually it helped them to feel less safe. So I don't know if it was their cult pseudo identity that was really present with the friends, but it was almost like hiding that part of them, rather than being able to be their authentic identity, be authentic and say, this is where I'm from. So I don't know if that answered at least some of that long question.
Someone made the comment, I did the same thing and began to realize that I had to form a more authentic self. I think it takes time and is a process.
Absolutely. I mean, definitely it's a process. And for some people, they make a decision not to tell other people. But I do think it depends how safe you are. I don't know if you attended the talk or if you've done some talks on trauma, but I think we need to feel safe enough before we tell people these things. I think it's really important, and it has to go at our pace and it be in our control. We have to drive the car with it. We don't need someone else telling us when to do it or whatever. But I think it does make for stronger connections if people know us. But it's a balance, isn't it?
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Someone asked the question, does group recovery come in waves? Life may move on, then group issues come up.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I would say definitely. You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I mean, I've had many years of therapy, and I trained as a therapist, so I had to have therapy, and it was the best thing that I ever had to have, because I had and I still have access to a very, very kind, loving person who was very boundaried and always kept things as they should be, you know, boundary, but but kind. And so I've worked on myself. I think as a therapist, I should have that standard for myself, that I have the support that I need, so I'm healthy in myself. And I still get triggered sometimes, you know. And so, you know, with the COVID thing, the feeling of kind of being like you have to stay in, or being a bit maybe trapped. I mean, it's okay after a week or two, but then it's like, you know, I can't go. And so those things can be triggered. And so I've learned, and I said this in the trauma talk, I think I've really learned just to be at home with triggers, and to think, okay, actually, in a way, even though it's uncomfortable and it can be very painful, to think, okay, here's something else for me to work on, and that's a good positive thing, because it's something else maybe that was sort of somewhere, you know, in the back of my subconscious that I needed to really allow myself to face. And so I genuinely do that. And, you know, with anything that's a trigger, we notice with curiosity, not with judgment. So it's like, okay, so I put my hands like this. I literally think, okay, you know, here's something else. So what is it that I need to attend to? And the relief that comes when I make the connection, the pattern match I talked about, I make that connection. Oh, the present is matching the past. It's not in the present. Oh, phew, it's just a memory. It's not actually something that's dangerous right now. And it doesn't mean I'm not recovered. So I learned when I did the PhD, I did an interview with someone, and it taught me so much, because when you're interviewing people for research, you have to be very careful of not allowing them to become very distressed. So you have to, those are the sort of ethics of it, especially working with survivors of abuse. So I interviewed someone who is actually a therapist. I interviewed quite a few therapists, and I asked about the experience, and they started to cry. And I was like, is there, you know, is this okay? Do they feel safe enough here? Got them a tissue, and I said, you know, you're very upset. And they said, I'm not upset, I'm remembering. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because it could be an inclination to try and make them feel better, but actually they weren't feeling bad, they were just remembering. And this person said, in remembering, I remember how much it hurt me, and how terrible it was for me. And so it took maybe 20 minutes, this sort of part of the interview. And then at the end of that part, we moved on to something else. And I saw them after the session, and they were really happy and getting on. And what I learned from that is that actually recovery is a lot more about being able to go into our feelings and come back out of them. Because this person was able to really get in touch with the full blast, or certainly some of the blast of the pain that they felt about their cult leader and how things were for them in the group.
Right.
Then they kind of recovered themselves, literally recovered themselves. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting and feels really healthy, because in a cult, we suppress ourselves, we have to suppress our feelings. Certainly I did, and people I've worked with have said this. So maybe it's a lifelong thing. Maybe we're always recovering to some degree, and maybe that's okay.
Someone said 2 months ago I left a yoga cult after 10 years.
Wow.
Still feeling numb and sad in a number of feelings. Thank you for the session.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm writing a book at the moment. So I have a workbook that I use with clients, and I'm writing it up into a book. And I've been studying thought reform to articulate it really clearly in the workbook. And a big part of thought reform is the suppression of our authentic feelings. We do thought stopping in a cult, and we do feeling stopping in a cult. Yeah. So kind of when we come out, and you're only very recently out, there's going to be kind of a roller coaster of feelings, suppressed feelings coming up, and what do I do with them? And then numbing can be a trauma response to that, you know, this is just too much, I can't deal with it. You know, so it's a journey, but it is a journey that can be completed, as I say, you know. Recovery is possible.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for making that comment.
Yeah, really. Very interesting.
Someone said, perhaps it depends also when and how you left. I left decades ago, and back then no one knew really what a cult was. So no one heard me talk about it until I started an MSc in counseling. What really helped me was recognition that what I was experiencing had a reason, a cause. I was not simply going mad. The therapist really validated my experience.
That's amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you. You know, and yes, if you look at Take Back Your Life by Enya and Madeline, it's a very good book. I love it for, you know, basic, kind of covers so many different aspects of recovery. And they make it very clear in there that leaving, how you leave makes a difference to what happens after. If you're thrown out, you're likely to feel kind of different to someone who's made a decision or planned to leave. So you could look that up if you're interested in looking that up.
Someone said, how do you accept what was done to you? The Moonies destroyed my life that I can never take back. I'm in America forever as a result, and my family is in South Africa. How do you stop feeling anger, resentment, hatred towards this cult? How do you process the pain of what they did to you, especially since there is no justice for what they did to me?
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge question. I'm so sorry, you know, that you've been left with this. I mean, really, to find a therapist who understands about cults and to spend time with them and to really allow enough time to go through what happened, to process your feelings, to understand the dynamics of how they did what they did, to undo and chew over the introjects, the negative beliefs about yourself that you're probably left with, and to be able to learn to transform your rage, you know, so often these people just get away with it. And my leader got away with it. And I felt for such a long time. In fact, when I'm in a rage, I swear terribly.
Yeah.
I mean, people are quite surprised because I look like this white, grey-haired, middle-class lady who lives in this pretty village. And then I start swearing like a trooper. And I feel a lot better for it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And, you know, quite enjoyed having, I mean, this is like thinking about sort of almost rage fantasies about, see, for me, it's just one of the specific leaders and thought, you know, not doing anything to them because I would get into trouble. And I don't feel like this now. I kind of processed it. But I had to go through a long time when I processed my feelings with a therapist, like that really helpful comment about the person who did their MSc in counselling. You know, someone who acknowledges that actually the reason you feel the way you feel is because they treated you so badly and left you in this place. And it makes me feel very angry now for you, you know. And it is such an injustice that these people get away with these things. And so somewhere inside us, we have to find a way of processing, actually acknowledging our feelings about it, not denying them, like in that interview, of actually being able to say, this is incredibly painful and I would like to kill them, or I'd like to, you know, for me, it was like pull one hair out at a time. I thought that would hurt very much and it wouldn't put me into any kind of trouble. I'm not suggesting anyone does this. I'm just saying this is like a rage fantasy and people have them.
Yeah.
So, you know, just to acknowledge your feelings, but we heal a lot in relationships. So it's finding a safe person that you can really allow yourself to feel whatever you feel about it and have some comfort from them in a boundaried and professional way. Yeah.
In regards to the previous comments on someone being in a yoga cult and feeling numb in a lot of emotions, they also commented that is so true. I escaped the Moonies 20 years ago and went into numbness for 20 years. It was simply too hard to deal with. Then I discovered ICSA last year. Thank God. Thank you. That is a very kind comment. I'm glad that ICSA has been helpful for you. That would be my hope in some way. Yeah.
And the numbing, you know, it's a way of dealing with the enormity of what happened. And maybe there's a time to be numb and a time then to say, actually, this needs to unfreeze, and a time to get the help. But I'm not telling you what to do or anything. I'm just saying it serves its purpose to help us to cope, you know, and get through that very hard time.
Yeah. Thank you. And for those of you who may have joined a little bit late, it looks like we've had some people jump in. This time is for you. Yeah, hi. This time is for you to ask Gillie any questions that you may have related to cult recovery, you know, perhaps how you've been processing this time during COVID. We're here for you as kind of a wrap-up date. So please feel free to type any questions that you may have. And, you know, I have a question, and it's actually kind of a funny question, but I feel like I've gotten mixed responses on it from cult survivors. There's been a huge hit Netflix documentary right now called Tiger King. Don't know if you've seen it, heard of it. You've heard of it. And some people have been getting really triggered while watching that. The show definitely highlights a lot of cultic dynamics. One of the characters featured kind of ran like an ashram almost with tigers and just treated the women there so poorly. I don't know if any of you guys have watched it. But, you know, with everything that's been going on with, I feel like there's almost, and I've been saying this for a while now, but there's almost this, you know, there's almost this cultic following around the term cult in the media right now. People are so fascinated and entrenched with it and are just so interested. You know, how I just feel like it's everywhere. And there's also a show right now called Unorthodox, or I believe is what it's called. It's about someone who I believe left a Hasidic Jewish community and fled from her family. It's like, have you had people come to you and say, this is really helpful for me to watch these things, or I can't watch these things? How do you recommend people pace themselves with the media and the way that cultic groups may be portrayed right now?
Right. Well, obviously it can be really triggering, like you say. I mean, we need to take care of ourselves. You know, if it's really triggering and you start feeling overwhelmed, then, you know, shut it off. I don't tend to watch that kind of stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Because I hear about it all the time. I'm writing about it. It's like, ugh, I don't watch what I call crap on telly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can be really difficult too. For some people, I think having it put into the media has been like, wow, now other people can kind of see what I went through in some ways. But for others, it can be really triggering. So,
well, it can be both, can't it? Because it can be normalizing as well.
Sure.
And I mean, I like someone else in one of the questions or comments. I left before there was the internet, you know, in the old days, you know. And so there wasn't, I mean, there literally was not access to anything. You couldn't just go Google blah, and find a million different things. That you were kind of, I don't know. I think, what did I hear? I think I read a leaflet quite some time after we'd left with the criteria of a cult, and I'm not even sure how I came across that, and I just went, oh yes, this kind of list, and that was really started to affirm some of my feeling that actually, yes, I'd been in a cult, and that is what it was a cult. So what I'm saying is, I don't have that experience of watching a program on YouTube or something and seeing, oh, it's like a mirror, you know, almost a mirror reflection of something that I was in. So, so that can be very helpful as well, because it normalizes it. It helps with some of the dynamics, you know. So sometimes I suggest to people to have a look at those other things, you know, if they want to, because then they can start to objectify their experience. They can kind of see, okay, so it happened like that for that person, so maybe it happened like that for me. So you can then start to sort of understand more clearly what's happened to you. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Someone made the comment, Tiger King, and people's obsession with Tiger King freaks me out too. I absolutely agree with that. There is a lot more information about cults available to the public now in documentaries, etc. But sometimes it feels like people consume that like entertainment. And when I think about talking to people, I worry about their interest will be sensationalist, which is hard to navigate. Oh, please beware of that. I so agree with you. It is. It's so sensationalist, everything that's put into, you know, the media surrounding cults can be. Thank you for that comment.
And that kind of, that tracks back to the previous comment about telling your friends.
Exactly.
Doesn't it? That feeling of, are they going to be voyeuristic, or are they going, you know, it's like, ooh, tell me more, or actually are they going to get that this was a terrible experience and a cult is a thing that, you know, somebody should change the law and outlaw, you know.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Someone said, I do believe that if I can write and tell my story of 10 years in the cult will be a huge in helping with the healing process. Right. But it's so very overwhelming. Where does one start to tell your story? It's a great question.
Yeah. Well, I expect other people have got some ideas about that. I guess it's, I mean, I don't know really. I think for me, I didn't tell my story very much at all until I did my doctoral research, and then because I needed to, because I wanted to, and because I needed to I did qualitative research, so the examiner, who's the person that reads it, needed to know where I was coming from, and I also needed to declare that I'd been in a cult, because I asked former cult members, what do you think former members need to recover from an abusive cult experience? And that's actually only in the last kind of 6 years that I actually wrote it down, and then people have read my thesis, so they've read my story. For other people, it seems like one of the early things they do, you know, that actually it's a way of creating a timeline which can be very helpful, and of gathering your thoughts. I guess it's going to be different for everybody, and maybe a therapist can help with that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Someone said, can you speak to gaslighting? I'm an SGA, and I've recently realized that I have been being gaslighted by my family pretty much my entire life. I'm 40 now. I'm becoming more and more awake to this dynamic, but as I do, it feels unbearable to stay in the pattern with them. I try to become separate from it, but it feels like once they have put their false judgment of who I am or what I'm doing or feeling onto me, I can't seem to separate internally from that judgment. It feels like a trigger wrapped up with disassociation. I just wondered if you might have some helpful tips. Thank you.
I mean, I'm assuming you have a lot of contact, or you still live with them. I mean, I think that's a really difficult situation to be in, if I'm honest, to actually have the gaslighting is when someone kind of redefines your truth and your reality, isn't it? That, you know, they're kind of telling you who you are and what you are, and usually it's actually very different to actually who you are and what you are. And the term comes from a film called Gaslight from the 1940s. And I actually just realized that Margaret Singer actually talked about the gaslight effect back in her book back in the 90s. So that's really interesting, because it seems like it's a new idea, but actually it's interesting that she picked up on this. And her book is called Cults in Our Midst, and it's a very useful book. I think it's a complex question, because I think it's tied up with the pseudo identity, and, you know, the part of you or the part of us that buys into the gaslight effect, that thinks they must be right if they're saying it, or that, yeah, you get what I mean by that. So so it's kind of, how do I stay with my authentic sense of who I am and my authentic identity, and not take on or introject, take in and not chew over the things that they're saying. And in order to kind of really protect yourself, it might have to get quite noisy.
She said I'm in a lot of contact with them, but mainly by phone and visits.
Okay. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff about boundaries. You're right not to be treated like that. To actually maybe set some kind of boundary or agreement. You know, that actually, I don't know, because every situation is so different. So I'm kind of reading between the lines.
Yeah.
But actually, you have a right to set your boundaries, to have a protective layer around you, to not be abused, and not have to put up with any kind of behaviour that is gaslighting. You know, because it's that person doesn't know you better than you know yourself, and they don't know you better than you know yourself.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's any use.
Before I ask the next two questions, this is being streamed, I think, to Facebook Live. Some people on Facebook Live have some questions. They actually want to know more about who we are, you and I, Gillie. So, Gillie, would you like to?
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, sure. You can start, and I can.
Okay. So my name's Gillie Jenkinson, and I'm an accredited psychotherapist in the UK. I was in a Bible-based cult called the Love of God Community in England, in Birmingham in England, in the 1970s. I was there for about 7 years. I met my husband there. We got married as we came out of the cult. We're still married, nearly 40 years later. And unfortunately, it was a Bible-based group, and we joined another church, and they said, come and join us, that we understand about cults, and they didn't. And so we ended up cult hopping, if you understand that term, for about another 14 years. So someone else asked this thing about lost years, and it's like, yeah, so many years that went by. We finally left in 1995, and I tried to find a counsellor who could help me with what I was realising was a cult, but what is a cult, and you know, how can I get help with that? And there wasn't anyone. There was one person who offered sort of information, and they were really unboundaried and told us we should stay in this cultic church we were in because we could change it from the bottom up. So that was really unhelpful. And so I made the decision then I'd train as a therapist, and that was the beginning of a long journey from 95 to now. And I trained as a therapist. I didn't concentrate on cults to start with. I just wanted to learn about depression and just all the things that can come up in a client session. I did voluntary work for a rape crisis centre, and then I became a member of staff there, which was a really exciting day when I got a paid job doing my counselling. And I worked there for 11 years with trauma and women who'd been child sexual abuse and assault and things. And then I did a master's in Gestalt psychotherapy, which has been great because a lot of the theories, what I use in some of my thinking, Gestalt's not all great, nothing actually is, but there's a lot of useful ideas in it. And then I did my PhD, and both of the masters and my PhD, I asked former cult members, what do you think helps former members recover? And I now specialise in working with former cult members and writing as well. Had some time off actually. I just had 4 months off to write, and I get back to work. So, you know, I'm really busy. I'm happy with how things turned out. This is my post-traumatic growth. We talked about that earlier. So that's me. I have 2 daughters who I adore, and I can't see at the moment because we're in self-isolation, but that's okay. Right. And yeah, live in a beautiful area called the Hope Valley, and that's the name of my company, Hope Valley Counselling.
Yeah. My name is Ashlen Hilliard. I'm the current assistant to the executive director for the International Cultic Studies Association, also referred to as ICSA. Some people call it ICSA. Whatever you want to call it's fine. So I grew up, I was born and raised in a high control Christian fundamentalist group, and I'm 3rd gen, maybe even 4th. And so I actually met my husband in the group. We both were, we went to a school that was for those in the group, a college. Is a very, very small college, and it's a very small group overall. And when I left, the group, we left the group together, actually, my husband and I moved back out to Utah, which is where I'm from originally, and I got involved with those leaving polygamy as a case manager. I was helping women and children who were leaving polygamy and just helping them start their lives over again in many cases. I have since relocated to Portland, Oregon. That's where I'm at currently. And I'm involved, you know, I'm wanting to be involved more, and I've been helping with the safe meetups out here. It's Spiritual Abuse Forum for Education. We did a conference out here last year in September, and it drew quite a few people, and we're doing meetups out here for those leaving, you know, spiritual abusive groups, high control groups, cultic groups, you name it. So that's what I'm currently working on. So thank you, and thank you for introducing yourself as well. Someone said, I have become increasingly, perhaps worrisomely, comfortable with being isolated during COVID-19. As someone who was born and raised as a JW, I left decades ago, and who recently earned a master's degree in mental health counseling, I have found this series incredibly helpful. It's a blessing and affirming to feel connected to this community for my personal healing. It's also been instrumental in my efforts to learn more about working with those who may be triggered during these times for whenever I can find work in the field. Thank you so much for access to these learning opportunities, both for my personal growth and the tools I hope will help my future clients. Thank you. That comment was so kind, and it means a lot. It means a lot. Someone said, I am about 2/3 of the way through writing my story of growing up in the Jehovah's Witnesses. It has been very healing, and it was really hard to get started. One thing I did was start with one scene, one moment, and work on telling that one moment in a way that felt viscerally connected to my experience. The first was the hardest to get into. I was very afraid to put my experiences on paper. It has gotten a lot easier. I have found it very cathartic and validating and healing to get these stories out of my head and put them into the world in written form. Great. Thank you.
It's a great comment. That's helpful, isn't it? For the
Yes.
person who asked about writing a book, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Start with one scene. Yeah, makes sense.
Someone said, what are some things that humans can do to prevent becoming part of a cult or an abusive relationship? Is this part of their I cannot say this word to save my life. Ingenuity? I think.
I don't know.
Is it part of their past that makes them more susceptible to becoming victims?
That's a huge subject.
Yeah.
They always are. I think it's a bit of a myth that a certain type of person or a certain history will lead somebody into a cult. Certainly it's a myth that a certain personality type will enter a cult. That's right, isn't it, Ashlen?
Yeah.
So, I mean, people need educating. They need to understand what a cult is. And it's very hard to explain to people who haven't been in a cult what a cult actually is, even with all this stuff online. You know, like we would talk I don't know if you've heard all of this talk, but we were talking about Tiger King and some of the other things that have been on Netflix and that sort of thing, about certainly groups that are high demand, or some of them cultic or cult. Even then people don't see what they're actually dealing with. And I think teaching people critical thinking skills, helping people to be very boundaried and not naive. And I think people, when they're spiritual, are like, you know, spiritual seekers are very vulnerable. You know, they're lucky if they end up in something that's healthy and not wanting to take them for a ride.
Right.
So, you know, and we also need to see what's the get out clause. You know, I remember seeing something about, I think it was insurance or something, and there was this tagline saying, you know, if you're going into something, make sure you know the way out. And, you know, if you go into something and you can't get out, then you're in trouble. So we need to really check it out. And I think Joe and Pat Ryan probably has a lot more wisdom than me on that one. But those are off the top of my head. You know, to always be driving your own car. Your life is yours, and there isn't anyone there to tell you what to do. That no one else knows better than you what you should do for yourself.
Yeah. Someone made a comment from Facebook Live. I have a program that works with women coming out of domestic violence.
Wow.
When I started teaching on gaslighting, I realized that it was what I had seen in my 8 years in the Way International. So many of the dynamics of domestic violence are similar to cultic dynamics. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was actually a session the other day with Elizabeth Bouchard on domestic abuse in COVID-19. And she talked about some of those dynamics. There'll be a recording of that if you're interested, to whoever made that comment, on the ICSA YouTube channel. I hope to get all the videos up by the end of April, which I have about a week, so I can do it. So I want those recordings to be available for you guys. So
thank you. great.
Someone made the comment, do you think these self-made messiahs like Sun Myung Moon, do they truly believe they are the messiah, or are they delusional, besides being narcissistic sociopaths?
Well, I think if you think you're the messiah, you probably are delusional. So, you know, that's my first feeling about that, and wanting to laugh somewhat. You know, I think I'm the messiah, you know, that is delusional. I think, like, cult leaders vary, you know, some are just out to make money, you know, and, you know, there's a certain leader who said, let's sell them a piece of blue sky. And, you know, the way to get rich is to create a religion. You know, it's very cynical, it's very cold and calculated. And that particular leader that I'm not going to name is, you know, made a lot of money. You know, there are people who go into it purposely, and then I think there are probably some who stumble into it. I think, you know, I don't know if the guy who led our cult, we had two leaders. One founded the group, one came in as, you know, sort of thinking he could probably just take advantage of what was already there. But I don't think he wasn't very successful at what he did, because the group actually folded, it disbanded. And I don't think he was as cold and calculated. I think he was an opportunist. So, and there's probably loads of other possibilities.
Someone asked the question, have you noticed a difference in the recovery of individuals from different kinds of groups? That was from Facebook Live.
I mean, there's going to be differences. But I actually think, I don't know if everyone agrees with this in the field or not, but probably a lot of people do, that I actually picture a cult, say you have a box, okay, the same shaped box, maybe it has something in it, you know, maybe it's a hairdryer, okay, that all these boxes have a hairdryer in it, but actually it's wrapped up in different wrapping paper. So it might be birthday paper, Christmas paper. So the idea is that that actually what goes on inside the cult is actually very similar. The dynamics between cultic groups, if it's a full-blown cult, then they're likely to be very similar. If it's a thought reform environment, there'll be very similar dynamics. The wrapping is different. It might be Bible-based, it might be pseudo-Christian, it might be Hindu, Buddhist, whatever. And so the other thing about me is that I developed an approach to working with former cult members, which I call post-cult counselling. I know it sounds like a generic term, so sometimes I put Hope Valley post-cult counselling, but it is a very particular way of doing the work with clients. And it's a relational psychoeducational approach. So I offer myself in relationship to the client to support them as any therapist would. I have a code of ethics, I have supervision, I have 2 supervisors, I have my own therapy, all of that's in place. But then the other aspect is psychoeducation, and anyone who comes to see me, they buy this workbook, which I'm currently writing up into a book, because, you know, I want to make it available and not just around working with me. And actually it's what I do at the moment is it's a loose leaf folder which I print up a whole load of worksheets, and we go through a number of different subjects. So I find these are the subjects, you could say this is a result of the research that I've done over the years, that various subjects nearly always come up, and that's trauma theory needs to be taught. We need to understand and look at the cult leader. We need to understand thought reform, and then there's, you know, other aspects as well. And so I work with both those who were born and raised, or born and or raised, and those who joined in exactly the same way. So we go through the same workbook, and the point of doing that is they have the information and they tell their story kind of into that information. Because if you go and see a therapist and you sit down and the therapist says, well, tell me about yourself and how do you feel about that, and you just simply pour out your story, the chances are that you might feel very overwhelmed at the end of the session and you gain nothing from it. Because, and there's a lot to say about this, because I think this is because of the pseudo-identity, that therapists are in danger of working with the cult pseudo-identity. So the client, the ex-cult member client cult identity instead of with the authentic identity. And so we have to unlayer the pseudo-identity and get to the authentic identity. And so that happens through understanding, through the psychoeducation. So if someone, say they come and they know what they're coming to get with me. I'm not saying I offer ordinary therapy, because I don't anymore. I just offer this post-cult counselling. And so we'll start with, well, what is a cult? And I have the ICSA definition, Michael Langoni's definition of what is a cult, which I changed slightly and added to for my thesis, my PhD. And sometimes we can spend maybe 6 hours going through that definition. And as we go through the definition, then the person tells their story. But they're gaining information about that experience at the same time. And therefore they go away with having learned something of the dynamics of that group, and have told their story, and have been normalized and affirmed, and actually seeing it in writing. I don't know about you, but like even watching some of these Netflix programs, you think, oh gosh, you know, that's happened to other people, or actually, you know, this is a sheet with this thing printed on it. So obviously somebody else has been through this because they've written it down. Is that clear? Was that clear, Ashlen?
And someone actually commented in regards to what you're saying, it has nothing to do with a person's intellect, but rather the person's circumstances in their life that can make them more susceptible to joining a cult.
Right.
I was a lost 18-year-old when the JWs knocked on my door. 25 years later, I woke up. I can't believe I fell for it. And, you know, there's actually studies too, you know, people who don't understand cults, or, you know, have asked like, well, how can people be so stupid to join a cult? You know, really ignorant sayings like that. In actuality, and I could be wrong, but I remember reading about a study where it talked about those who join may even have a higher intellect than others. And I could be wrong. Please correct me if I am, Gillie.
I'm sticking with that because I joined.
Yeah. So you're not stupid for joining a cult ever.
You know, I thought I was. I really did. And I think that kept me quiet. I mean, for those born and raised, at least, you know, you were just dropped into it. You didn't have a choice. But for those who, you know, so even though there's shame about growing up in it and telling friends, and I'm thinking back to a comment that we had earlier, but I think there's a lot of shame for those who join. But yeah, you know, it sounds really appealing. I mean, I was hooked when I was told God would love me forever, you know, and that sounds really appealing. It was only when I'd been in a few months I realized that, yeah, God would love me forever if I did all these other things, you know, and then I was hooked. I was already trapped. Yeah.
Sorry. I think a really good question to end on. And keep in mind too, we've had a lot of questions come through either via Facebook Live or through you know, the chat here. So if I didn't get to your question, it was not intentional, please send me an email. My email is next to my name there in the box, and I'll make sure and get it to Gillie, and so that we can answer all your questions from today. Someone said, please let Gillie know that her style of talking about this is very helpful. She is obviously knowledgeable, but not authoritarian. She comes across as someone who is just sharing valuable information with you. Thank you for that comment.
Well, thank you. That means the world to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a lot of hard work to get to this, and as I said, I don't know if you heard me at the very beginning, I feel quite really allergic to setting myself up as someone who knows better than other people, which is why I don't do a lot of these things. But you know, if it's a value, then that means the world to me, and I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Well, and we so appreciate you doing it. You have been so helpful. So the question I wanted to end on with today that came through was, I was born and raised a JW. I left when I was 30 and have been out for 20 years. One thing I have found very helpful in my recovery has been what I call unpacking the cult belief system and making choices about what my authentic self believes about the world and myself. I have my technique to do that process. I'm curious, what sort of tools or processes do you find effective in shifting cult implemented beliefs? Excellent question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think definitely unpacking. I love that. I love that term. I'd love to pinch that term, but you'd have to email me and give me your permission, and you may not want to, because I don't like pinching other people's things without acknowledging them. But unpacking is the lovely way of putting it. And I think, I don't know if you heard me say about the workbook and the psychoeducational stuff, and that is literally what we do. We unpack it, or we unlayer the pseudo-identity, and step by step. And I've watched people, I actually, it sounds kind of strange even to me, but I've learned to trust the workbook, to trust that process of going through that it going through it slowly but surely at that person's pace, and have watched people really come through something in that work. And I even, and I'm not saying this happens much, because it doesn't, but even one person took the workbook home and they showed their brother and then their family, who was still involved quite a lot in the group. And by the time we'd done a year's worth of therapy, post-cult counselling, the whole family had left the group, which was like not my intention, but I was very joyful about it. And yeah, and then they ended, and I haven't heard from them since. And so it's a time limited. They're not stuck with me for the rest of their lives, and that's really good and healthy.
Yeah. Thank you. And unpacking, I love that term. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Someone said thank you for this session, Gillie, and for the whole series, Ashlen. It has been so helpful and stabilizing. Thank you guys. You guys have been helpful for me during this time. And just the speakers have been so willing to volunteer their time and have been amazing. So if you guys are hungry for more, tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern time with Rachel Bernstein, we'll be doing this exact same thing if you had any questions that were unanswered. So thank you, Gillie. Thank you, Pat, for hosting.
Lovely to have time with you. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.